Budsy, mate, it's been ages. So good to have you back.
Tom. Thanks a lot. Good to see you.
Now, I'm just studying your background. To me, that's somewhat familiar. They're your lodgings, correct?
These are my lodgings. That sounds like it's straight out of a Sherlock Holmes book. But yeah, Dr. Watson.
The reason I ask,
not here. Go on.
The reason I ask is I understand you've been doing a little bit of traveling recently.
Can you see the dust? Yes, it's not been cleaned for a while.
Yeah, but also just there's an exotic aura about you, like you've been.
I have actually got quite a tan. I'm not going to show you my tan lines, but I've been to the south of France. I've been in Provence for the last 2 weeks. Got home yesterday, so I'm currently officially quarantining at the moment under the current COVID tyranny. I mean regulations. So yeah.
And how good is technology? It allows us to communicate even though you are under house arrest.
That's right. That's right.
Mate,
and I've got a good stash of wine to get me through it. So
only the best.
That's right. That's right. It is Australian, actually.
Oh, really?
Most of it, yeah.
But, mate, would you mind just taking a moment and sharing what do you have there?
I haven't got a clue because I order it from. I think there's a couple of. I haven't got a clue, actually, I'll be honest, because it comes from a wine club, if you like, and I just quickly look at it, stick it on the shelf because it's always good.
What's the club?
It's called Laithwaites. So there's a number of different clubs in the UK. I think even Virgin as a company do a wine club, but mine's Laithwaites. I get delivery every 2 or 3 months. This one happens to be Australian, but there's you can select them, but I've only joined it fairly recently, so I'm just letting them send me stuff. There's a couple of bottles that I was like, not sure about, but in general, it's pretty good stuff. So I actually, without getting up and walking over there, I'm not sure what I've got.
Okay. Well, I'm just doing a little bit of counting in background. And I think you might be short a couple of bottles, depending on how long your quarantine is. You knock over a bottle a day, sleep the other 12 hours.
That's it. Well, yeah, you're right. I might have to get a delivery.
So, Chris, what took you to France?
Well, Tom, you asked that question like you don't know, but I went over to France to meet my future family-in-law. So I've just got engaged to a lovely French girl, and we had a ceremony over there, which kind of officialized that status. So in France, they have to, well, they don't have to, it's tradition to go to the church even for your engagement. And so we did that in Provence, where she's from.
Well, mate, sincerest congratulations. You're doing the lounge room proud and everything we stand for. And you're continuing to expand the culture, and you are making inroads into great wine regions as well. You're ticking all the boxes.
All the boxes. Yeah, it was. I mean, you and Tam are obviously much more up on the wine front than I am. I can't even tell you what I've got behind me. But
we just pretend we are. That's it.
You just got the vocab list, put the buzzwords in when it. Yeah. Rosé. It's all about rosé in Provence. Yeah. And I knew that you'd probably ask, so I did a little bit of kind of digging while I was there, and the future father-in-law gave me a rundown of what the various different wines in the local region, and there's literally vineyards everywhere. And it's very hot, very dry climate, and so propitious, if you like, for producing rosé. And because of the heat, his explanation was essentially it's a lighter wine to drink, more refreshing. And to be honest, there's all sorts of different types as well, which I wasn't aware. Up until recently, rosé was just something that my grandmother drank. But
so rosé it's a style as opposed to it's not a varietal. So by way of example, out in the rack there, we've got some Malbec rosé, from Argentina, and the style is stereotypically, or that's probably the wrong word, but it's all to do with skin contact.
Yes.
For example, you take a big dark grape and you just minimize that skin contact, and so there's that hue to it, the pinky hue, but you really want to minimize that skin contact so that the tannins and the characteristics of the skin don't overpower and turn it into a big bold
red
whatever. But that gives it the sort of the pink light.
Well, this is it. I mean, this is one of the things I didn't realize was that it's all the same grapes that they use. It's just that it's just treated slightly differently. Like in my head, I thought, well, they probably use white grapes rather than red grapes or something like that. But no. And the other thing I found really interesting, it's logical, but there's obviously quite sweet ones, and then there's quite dry ones. And what the locals were telling me was that, yeah, we typically serve this one with, you know, fish or with food or salad or whatever, because they're well known for their Provence salads. I think maybe I'm mixing that up with somewhere else, but and then the sweeter ones are drunk as like aperitifs or as dessert, even dessert wines. So we had a couple of those, and those were amazing. I'd never had like a dessert wine before, but
Yeah, wow.
really, really good quality.
And I'm imagining that the southern coast of France, some of those food and wine pairings would be kind of groovy. So I think before you did mention some seafood. So can you give me like, yeah, I'm sure you went out to some beautiful little eateries or restaurants or in-home dining. What were you pairing with what?
Oh, for goodness sake. I mean, I just rely on the locals. So
what did they do?
So they gave me, I think with the seafood, it was typically, it was just whatever was local, really. So I think that what it tended to be was, rather than pairing a particular wine with a particular food, it was, this is a local wine, we want you to try this with this particular food. That's as far as it went. So I didn't do much experimenting in terms of, oh, can I try the sweeter one or the drier one? And the other thing was there's a local drink which isn't wine called pastis. You've probably heard of. I'm not sure.
No,
it's like
about it.
It's a liquor. You put about 20 centiliters in a glass. You put ice in, and then you top it up with water, and that's it. It's like an aniseed flavor. So I know I'm going slightly off topic here, but that blew me away. So I bought a couple.
Be careful with aniseed.
Yeah,
because I have a bad history with drinks that are flavored aniseed. So
okay. Oh, really? We'll move back on to rosé.
Keep talking.
don't want to pull any skeletons out of your closet there. But yeah, no, it's traditional drink from the south of France. So I think it's made in the Marseille area, and so it's either that or rosé basically. So I was more inclined, if I'm honest, towards the pastis because it's quite a refreshing drink, but so is rosé too. So you'd typically have a pastis for your aperitif before your meal, and then you'd move on to a rosé during the meal.
Wow, how the other half live. And you were torturing me throughout I don't know what stage of this trip you were at, but you were sending me some pictures, and I was kind of jealous. Just the scenery, the seascapes, the architecture, the streetways, just beautiful.
Well, there's an incredible, I mean, you live in an incredibly beautiful, naturally beautiful place too in Brisbane and Queensland, but I think the south of France is similar, but there's just an incredible wealth of history that goes with it too. So the port of Marseille, for example, was founded by the Greeks, I think. And it's just sort of developed ever since. I mean, there's some horrible parts of Marseille as well, but the old port there where we went was stunning. And there's a huge basilica on a hill to Our Lady, who kind of looks out over the bay, looks out over and keeps watch on the Bay of Marseille. There's a couple of, sticking with the religious theme briefly, there's a couple of apparition sites that we visited. So notably Cotignac, which is where St. Joseph appeared to a local, I think he might have been a local shepherd or a local builder, something like that. St. Mary Magdalene famously came and stayed, lived after the resurrection of Christ, lived in Provence on top of a mountain and in this kind of underground cave. Which they've now turned
with vines and she
at the bottom. If only. No, the story is a bit more edifying. She apparently she would live in the cave there, which they've now turned into a little chapel, but would be transported to the top of the mountain daily for prayer by angels. So it was like, wow, okay. But yeah, there's a few different. The St. Joseph apparition site is incredible because this person that he appeared to was, I think, perishing away from thirst. It's incredibly hot, and St. Joseph appeared just as a normal man and told him to move this stone and he'd find water, and he laughed it off. He thought it was a joke, and he told him to do it again, and there was this spring came out, of the ground. And when he turned around to say thank you, St. Joseph had disappeared. And there's now a church on this site, and the spring's there, so we drank some of the spring water. So that's sort of just a tiny snippet of the religious heritage that they have there. But the seascapes are incredible. You can imagine very, very beautiful beaches and all types of seaside activities. There's obviously the Cannes Film Festival is there as well.
Yes, so attracts all the A-listers.
That's right. We didn't see any celebrities, but there were people on our flight, both out there and back, who were attending that because that's been happening over the last month.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And with all the with all these apparitions, don't want to push the bill too hard, but how do you distinguish between local legends and things that you can actually attach a degree of
certainty to? Yeah. Well, I mean, this is going back, kind of unlocking the seminary study days, but I'm pretty sure basically if an apparition happens, it has to be investigated by the local ordinary. So the local bishop has to do an investigation, and it's quite in depth. I think we might have discussed this on another podcast actually, but you have to have, it will go through various stages. So there will be interviews. He'll appoint normally an investigator to look into it, and the priest will interview the individual and look at it from lots of different angles. It might be, depending on what's happened, it might be a team that goes in and looks at it. And then they'll report back on whether they think it carries weight, whether, what evidence there is that this might have happened or might not have happened. They'll appoint famously someone to play what they call the advocate of the devil, or the devil's advocate. And that person has to kind of try and explore all the reasons why it might not be true. And it can be quite rigorous. And some of these investigations take years. And then the bishop eventually will give his seal of approval, or will say, actually, no, we don't have sufficient cause to declare this, officially an apparition, or official apparition of Our Lady, or they'll say, actually, we think this, based on the message, we're not sure this is actually coming from above. Actually, it could be something else. It could be a bit dodgy. So there's all sorts of work that goes into it. So I mean, famously Fatima is another one, and Lourdes. But yeah.
Okay. So this is Provence. I mean, I'm compiling getting it down to a number, but not a concise list of countries that I've just got to tick. And would you say that Provence just has to be on that list?
I'd say so. I mean, if you include some of the top cities on the southern coast are Nice, Toulon, and then Marseille. You've got to go to this region. It's especially for someone like yourself who's into wine. And just next door to Nice is Monaco, the Principality of Monaco, and I don't know much about it, but it's an independent state, which is basically a city in the south of France.
It was Grace Kelly, wasn't it?
I've no idea. Oh yeah, I think did she marry someone?
Prince of Monaco or something?
Yeah. And you see the number plates, Monaco number plates on the roads around Nice. So it's cool. It's a really cool region. It'd be home from home for you because of the weather. But they have an incredible wind that sometimes blows. And so the first week was just way too hot for me as a Brit. But you acclimatize very quickly. And then the second week, for a few days, we had this very, very powerful wind. I can't remember the name, but it's got a specific name that the French give it. And, nobody does anything during that time. You don't go out on the water, except people like me. And we went kayaking on the sea, and we had to turn around and head back. And it was a bit sort of touch and go at some points. But
you hopeless Brits.
I know. Yeah. Well, they encouraged me, but yeah. So it's lots of sort of natural beauty, but also incredible for its history and for its food and wine and an overall decent place to visit, I'd say.
There you go. Great little snapshot. Very picturesque. I can almost see it. So congratulations again on the good news, the engagement, and thank you for providing us with your travel diary. On to some different news. So, but before we went live, you and I agreed. We tested it and we went, nah, we'll talk about this. Couple of young Catholics, because I've heard all the mature informed people talk about it.
So
yourself
now you want to talk to me.
Yourself excluded. And so I thought, Chris, I'm going to ask Chris what he thinks on the big news coming out of the Vatican on Pope Francis's most recent motu proprio, which, as some people are saying, drops a bomb on the many traditional Latin Mass societies, groups, etc., that are out there. So do you want to give, or do it together? I don't care. You go first. A little bit of a snapshot on what is going on.
Well, so for those who might not have heard of it, yesterday, so which was the 16th of July, Pope Francis issued, what was it, this motu proprio? I've got the name here on my other screen. So it's Traditionis Custodes. And basically what he's done is put the brakes on, if you like, the previous motu proprio of Pope Benedict, Summorum Pontificum, which, allowed for more widespread access, if you like, to the traditional Roman rite and the sacraments. Now, I think what has to be taken into account is not only the motu proprio itself, but the accompanying letter that he wrote, basically explaining how this is to be interpreted. The mind of the lawgiver, if you like. So I'm taking. Okay. That's not my thought. That's direct from Catholic Family News. They've done a great analysis of both the letter that comes with it and the motu proprio.
So there's a bit of an explanatory memorandum to flesh it out, because I've seen and I'm vaguely familiar with. I think there's 8 articles to the actual document itself, but I haven't looked at the cover letter.
Yes, there's eight articles. It's quite short, actually, and in typical post V2 fashion, post Vatican II fashion, it's quite vague in some areas. So, and it leaves a lot of room for kind of wiggle when interpretation. But if you read the accompanying letter that comes with it, it's very clear that this is to move everybody towards open acceptance of the principles of Vatican II, rather than up until now. Traditional Latin Mass communities were able to get by kind of implicitly accepting, but not having to openly declare that, they have no issue with Vatican II or with the new Mass. Now it's going to be moving towards you have to actually declare that you're on board with the program, if you like, and also no new parishes can be formed for the exclusive use of the Latin rite, the old rite. Sorry. And then, there's a number of different things in both the letter and the motu proprio, but it's not good news for. Well,
it's interesting you say that, because myself not having seen the letter, and you referred to some of the articles as ambiguous. And while I'd say, there were definitely sections or provisions where you'd go, that might be open to interpretation. For somebody, I think there was a Taylor Marshall commented on it, and I listened to a little bit of his presentation on it, and I thought it was kind of ironic for a pontiff who is in certain times opposed to rigidity, was a very rigid motu proprio, because even though there were some ambiguous sections, if you were to look at it as a whole, I'd go, there's no ambiguity as to what this is intended to achieve.
No, and I think I say that just because, having crossed paths with previously with people who would say, oh, well, it's not explicitly stated that X, Y, and Z, but it actually is very clear. And also, if you add to that his explanatory letter that goes with it, there's no question. This is basically to move everybody towards the new Mass eventually. I think he says that in his letter, and essentially. He gives the bishops the power, if you like, to continue to allow the old Mass, but it can't be in a parish church. But in the letter, he explains that this is basically to allow more time for people to move towards what he calls in his letter the Roman rite. So he's basically refers to the new Mass as the only. He's getting rid of this distinction really between extraordinary and ordinary form, and it's just the new Mass, and there's no real mention of the old rite. So I think that with that, because he can't come out and totally abrogate the old rite because of quo primum, St. Pius V, which basically said that this is the rite of Mass and it's the right of the priest to say this. He basically canonized the old rite of Mass. So he can't out and out cancel it, but he's done everything to do that in an roundabout way. And I mean, even going so far as to say that the readings must be in the vernacular as well. Yeah. Now, what he means by readings, I'm not quite sure if that, and this is discussed in the Catholic Family News analysis, whether he just means the epistle and the gospel, or whether he means all of the propers. And in that case, whose translations are they going to be using? Because, it's a bit unclear, but I think that's laying the foundations for future declarations and future tightening up.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So if we were to step back and give a little bit of a snapshot of, we may not be able to hit it all, but the main things that the motu proprio does. So firstly, and you've already hit on it, it unwinds Summorum Pontificum.
Yeah, he says that as well. He says, look, my predecessors, JP2 and Benedict, they did this in order to try and heal the rift, or, the language he uses is carefully chosen, and I'm summarizing, but heal the rift, or I think he uses the word schism of Archbishop Lefebvre. But it hasn't worked. So I'm doing this to unify in the name of unity, which is ironic. But so carry on. Sorry.
It undoes that. It gives diocesan bishops a discretion, which is still subject to a further permission from the Vatican. Correct me if I've got this wrong.
Yeah, for any new priests, I think, who wish to say the old rite. I think that they have to apply via the bishop to the Vatican. I might be mistaken, but I think that's correct. Any
existing Latin Mass communities have to apply to the local diocese.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Again, so they, anyone that's been previously granted permission has to reapply for permission again. The bishop, I'm just looking at it now. So the bishop has to designate a location where.
This was interesting. Go on.
So it has to designate one or more locations where faithful adherents of these groups, so he's talking about old rite communities, may gather for Eucharistic celebration, but not in parochial churches and without the erection of new personal parishes. So how that's going to look?
Parochial church.
Well, basically a parish, a local parish church. So, you've got a lot of places where there's what I'm thinking of one down the road from me where the FSSP say mass in a local parish church, which they share with the Novus Ordo parish. So that, I guess, won't be possible going forward.
Okay.
So I have to pick a location. I don't know how that's going to look. Are they going to give them a church that's not in use, perhaps? Or I don't know. But what they're saying is, basically you can't celebrate it in a parish church. I'm not sure why that is, but that's one of the articles.
Okay, so there's a few other little things, but look, we've got the gist, we've got the vibe.
Yeah,
what I'm interested to talk about is where in a particularly interesting situation, I think, you and myself being subscribers to the Society of St. Pius X.
Yeah.
I want to start by asking you personally, because, good guy, devoted Catholic, you have your thumb on the pulse. You obviously had your thumb on the pulse when this came out. What effect did this have on you?
Not much. If this is not going to affect anybody that goes to the SSPX because we've already made our choice. This is the kind of, and again, I'm stealing this from Catholic Family News, but this is the Thomas More moment for the people who are in what was formerly the Ecclesia Dei communities. So I'm thinking of the Fraternity St. Peter, Institute of Christ the King, Good Shepherd Institute, all those kind of the Oratorians. You've got one in Brisbane there. So this is the moment where they're going to have to decide what road they take. And so for me personally, it's been a long time coming. It was never, you could never really have this unhealthy compromise between the extraordinary and ordinary form. And Pope Francis has pointed that out. So for SSPX faithful and priests, we've already made our choices and we're already in that position. But for those people in what you might call more mainstream traditional Catholics, this is that time now where they're going to have to choose. And so for me, how does it affect us? I guess we're probably going to see quite a lot of people start attending SSPX churches or chapels. So I think it's really important for people on our side of the fence to be open and welcoming to them, rather than saying, you know, haha, I told you so. It's going to be a case of, you know, understanding there's going to be a lot of anguish and sadness and difficulty and family rifts and all the rest of it in these communities. And it's not going to be easy, particularly for the priests in these communities. Even for diocesan priests that are, you know, Novus Ordo priests, who have been trying to move towards tradition, especially for the younger generation. So to answer your question, I've rambled a bit, but it doesn't really affect the SSPX apart from perhaps more people attending our churches.
Look, that in all honesty, you expanded on that beautifully, and my initial reaction was sort of the same, minus your level of analysis. It was, okay, you know, but for the grace of God, kind of happy I am where I am, because this happened a long time ago for us and we've already been ostracized. So this is kind of easy. You do worry for a lot of the other Latin Mass communities, but I think your point on being open, inviting, watching that space and exercising charity is just cannot be undervalued, especially now in any aspect of the world. The world, it's just a sad place. It's a tragic place. And when that which you hold dearest is also, you know, torn up and plunged into chaos, there really isn't an awful lot left for you to hope for. And it really makes you feel for those people who really have a firm conviction in the way they've been practicing their faith. They've been in Latin Mass communities for one reason or another. They haven't crossed over to the society, not passing judgment. They've just been where they've been, and now they've found themselves in a position where, you know, really the right way for them has been torn up, and they've got to go one way or another. And to me, that would be kind of psychologically torturous potentially.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's going to be heartbreaking. Let's say, you know, there's an awful lot of converts at the moment. I don't know if you've experienced the same in Australia, but I've spoken to a number of people who are converting. And
I've had a number on this show who
of course,
converted to Catholicism. I had an excellent talk with somebody last week. I'd definitely invite anybody listening to this, go back to listen to the episode I did last week. I won't name it for you. You've got to do your homework and go listen to it. But a young gentleman who was an atheist found Catholicism, found traditional Catholicism in the form of one of these Latin Mass communities, and just their whole world was revolutionized.
Yeah.
And
imagine you're that person, and let's say you've got 100%. Family, you know, like you've brought them into the faith, you've brought them into this, you know, vibrant parish community, and in one fell swoop, seemingly, that's all now on the line. It's at risk of being lost.
And I don't pretend for a second to, you know, maybe this person or these people have it all sorted out, but I can just see a very problematic situation for anybody currently in the Latin Mass community and wanting to sustain that way of practice. Because
if you read both the motu proprio and the accompanying letter, it's quite clear that it's not a case of, okay, you can keep doing your thing. It's a case of, we've got certain provisions, but the local bishop has much more power over it now than he previously did. He has, you know, even goes to as far as specifying the times and days that Mass can be said. So he might say, well, you can only have Mass on a Thursday, you know. So how are you going to fulfill your Sunday obligation? And it also goes so far as to say this is basically the implication is that this is temporary until everybody's been moved across to the proper form, which is the new rite of Mass. So it's sort of there might be people out there desperately thinking, oh well, maybe we'll be all right, but I'm not convinced of that. I think he's just appointed Archbishop Roche to head up basically the I can't remember the name of the congregation, but the congregation
it's quite long
that are going to be enforcing this. Archbishop Roche hates the old right, an English archbishop. So I mean, he's put his Rottweiler in charge a couple of months ago, and they're going to come for it. I mean, if you listen to, as I say, I'm not an expert, but if you listen to the Catholic Family News analysis, they give their opinion or their take on after going through these documents as to where this might be leading. And what they suggest is this is probably going to go the same way as the Franciscans of the Immaculata, who basically, Franciscans of the Immaculate, who were, basically sidelined because they were too traditional. They got apostolic visitations, and that's probably going to come for communities like FSSP and the others. They'll get a visit, and it'll be like, well, there's closet traditionalists at the seminary. They didn't want to, to use the Thomas More sort of analogy. They didn't want to swear the oath of supremacy, supremacy of the, where Thomas More refused to say that the king was head of the Church of England. I think there'll be something similar, maybe not an oath, but you might have to celebrate a new mass just to show your solidarity. That's what they proposed to Archbishop Lefebvre, of course. They asked him, just say one new mass and all your legal troubles will go away. We all
know how that ended.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, sad. It's sad, but inevitable almost. And I mean, let's see where it goes. But it's
you could almost call it the logical culmination, which has been on the cards for a significant amount of time, and out of it's a constant theme within Catholicism, going right back to, don't want to go too deep here, but the redemption on the cross. Out of gravely dark situations, that's where you find the panacea. That's where the most good is drawn. So, and I don't think you have to look too deeply to see the potential for the good that can come out of this. It's really drawing the line in the sand. The stakes are high. I don't think you have to look too deeply to see why the stakes are high. All anybody has to do now is kind of, to my mind, pick which side of the line they're going to be on.
I think it's going to be interesting to see how the heads of the various communities react to this, whether they say, right, this is it, we're going the way of the SSPX, or whether they try and continue to sort of compromise in various ways. I just don't think that's going to work. But and then you'll obviously have lots of individual priests and then lay people, but mainly priests who are going to struggle with what you might call prudential decisions, right? So for us it's black and white, isn't it? But if you've got if you depend upon the local diocese for your food and shelter, it's not as easy, is it? Sorry, what were you going to say?
No, very, very true. On that point, what do you think is and this isn't something I've thought an awful lot about, because to me, the at-risk groups are the small traditional Latin Mass communities who are at the mercy financially, etc., of the diocese. But big picture, who have the most to lose from this? Because even though this is, it's a really, really strong hand played by the Vatican, I just don't see how the Vatican, the current Vatican approach to Catholicism is sustainable long term because of the enormous growth traditional Latin Mass communities are experiencing. But that being said, this whole unite the clans mentality, I don't necessarily subscribe to that, because there being so many different clans means there are subtle ideological differences that, the existence of the different Latin Mass groups is evidence in and of itself of the small, albeit subtle at times, ideological differences. So it's definitely not a unified front. I'd say that the Society of St. Pius X would be pretty, as we've already discussed, business as usual.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one. There's sort of a couple of questions in that. But you asked initially who has the most to lose. I guess on a personal level, priests, because they've devoted their life to this, to whatever community they're currently in, and it's going to very much depend on individual. It's going to be very difficult for them, for a lot of them. The faithful, less so, because you can choose to go to mass at the SSPX, or you might find a local a lot of independent priests, as happened after Vatican II. There was a lot of priests who sort of became independent. But in terms of, you're right, these communities, you mentioned earlier, or I mentioned the Oratory in Brisbane. I was talking to a mutual friend this morning, and they said it's never been busier. Tons of masses on a Sunday, et cetera. And yeah, they can't not know this in Rome, right? The people who are organizing the pro-life rallies, the people who are vibrant, the people who are having kids, the people who are making waves in a good way in the Catholic Church are the, generally speaking, traditional Catholics, and the various communities that they go to mass. So for the SSPX, it might be a bit tricky depending on how things pan out. If they start having waves of priests coming over, there might be some question marks over validity of ordinations, for example. Who ordained you? Were you ordained in the new rite? Do we consider
that's
that?
A headache.
That's going to be a mess. But I mean, it depends how they obviously choose to deal with that. But yeah, in terms of SSPX. Yeah, it's like you say, it's very much business as usual, and I think it's come at a very interesting time. More, if we talk about the geopolitical sort of situation we find ourselves in, the SSPX and these other, ex Ecclesia Dei communities were pretty much the only ones who continued to stay open during COVID lockdowns and say masses, and you got priests here in confessions and giving communion, outside of normal hours, and really going the extra mile. I mean, they have been some real heroes in this last year and a half. And so, they do have the stuff within them to be heroes. They like I say, they are the ones making changes and turning up for pro-life rallies and things like that. So I don't know. I hope that sort of answers the question, but it's going to be really interesting. I mean, that sounds awful, but from an outsider's sort of perspective, just seeing how this goes.
And at the end of the day, I think just personally, in any conflict situation, what you don't do is panic. Easy for us to say for the reasons we've discussed, because we're not the ones panicking.
We're not the ones who are in the crosshairs, are we?
For one reason or another, and that could be controversial to some, but for you and me, it's not, and it's the way it is.
Well, that being said, we can maybe quickly go into that. I mean, it's not as difficult as it previously was for people to start going to the SSPX because of Pope Francis, right? He's given certain concessions. He's been very nice to the SSPX. Why is that? That's an odd one, right?
Don't have a clue.
On the one hand, he's smashing down on these ex-Ecclesia Dei communities now, as of yesterday. And on the other, not a peep on the SSPX. And in his pontificate, it's only been, you can have faculties, you can do this, you can do that, making it easier in conscience for people who might have qualms to come to the SSPX. So, I mean, my take is he's herding everyone towards the SSPX, or to maybe not towards them, but to be at least affiliated with them. And then at some later stage will be declared like the Orthodox Church, schismatic, and that'll be it.
But this is what I don't understand, because I heard somebody before alluding to that maybe, and unless I misunderstood them, I took it as, this could be a subtle intentional corralling of all the smaller Latin mass groups into a Society of St. Pius X like structure. So what do they have to gain from that? Because it's not like...
The Vatican?
Yeah.
Well, interestingly, if you read his letter, he calls He doesn't declare Archbishop Lefebvre schismatic, but he says the movement. And so what they'll probably say is they'll just sort of say, well, this isn't in unity with the church and with the magisterium of the church as stated since Vatican II, and then they can get rid of it. They just say, well, you're no longer Catholic.
Wouldn't it just be history repeating itself?
Do you mean in terms of the SSPX movement? Well,
correct.
No, because the excommunications were only of the 4 SSPX bishops. It was never declared fully. You're right, though. It's sort of, I think basically. I take
your point.
Yeah, I think his probably end game is to purge the church, as it were, of the traditional rite, and I mean, he's referred on more than one occasion to his disdain or dislike for traditional Catholics, if you like, especially young people. Mm-hmm. He said he didn't understand why young people go to it, or something of that nature. And so, yeah, for him, it's the logical conclusion of Vatican II, right? We move forward together, brothers and sisters, in this glorious revolution of the new mass and all that goes with it, ecumenism, collegiality, that sort of stuff. But yeah, I mean, sort of history repeating itself, but it's different because, I mean, what happened in 1988 with the episcopal consecrations was, the SSPX went definitively one way. No, I don't think it is history repeating itself because those other Latin Mass communities didn't exist at that time.
Good point.
Yeah, I think FSSP might have been just around. I think it was around that time they left because of the consecrations. Mm-hmm. I think it's basically a way to draw a line in the sand and say, right, everyone on this side of the line, you're in touch with, on the same page. Vatican II is fine. We love it. New Mass only. And they'll eventually phase out the old Mass without fully saying you can't say it.
Right. Well, maybe you've just answered the question of why he's so easy on the society, or why maybe he just does not care.
Well, I think it's, everyone on that side of the line, fine. Everyone on the SSPX side of the fence, you're out. And there'll be some sort of declaration, or who knows? He could do it in any way. That's probably maybe what the end game is. I mean, we're just lay people, shooting the breeze.
Having a fun conversation.
Yeah, it could be anything, but it seems to be that's the way things are going. The other thing is, they can't really do very much about the SSPX because they have their own property and they rely on quo primum. They're not reliant upon Summorum Pontificum. They're not reliant upon the local bishop to ordain their priests. And then that's another point. What are all these seminarians that are packed into the FSSP seminaries and all the others going to do? Because they can't ordain them in the old rite, or they can't, that's part of this. I think they say they can't have new priests in the old Mass without permission from Rome or something like that nature. You can't have new parishes, and the ones that do exist, you're winding them down or moving them over towards the new rite eventually. What are all these seminarians going to do? So they're squeezing them at both ends, really. Because if you're a young bloke thinking about becoming a priest, where are you going to go?
Uh-huh. And I know it's still early days. It was only today's Saturday. Yesterday was Friday when I think the Motu Proprio was published. But have there been any high profile church figures commenting on it?
Depends what you mean by high profile. If you're an adherent of Dr. Timarsh, then I guess he's done a video, as you mentioned, Taylor Marshall. But in terms of, I was referring more to clergy. Yeah, no, I haven't been following it today. It's midday here in the UK, and so I haven't really heard anything on the Twitterati or the Twitter webs or whatever you might call it. But I'm sure there probably will be at some point. But people, I imagine people have just been absorbing the shock. I'm sure around the dinner tables last night of the various oratories and seminaries, this was the topic of conversation, right? For these communities. And then it'll be a time of, okay, what are we going to do? How's it going to look in practice? He talks about this is something the Catholic Family News guys talk about a bit more, but that the local bishop has to appoint a priest who is the bishop's delegate and is entrusted with the pastoral care of these various groups of faithful. But the qualities that this priest has to have are quite stringent. It has to be.
Yes, he's got to be a good egg.
Yeah, skilled in the use of the Missale Romanum. I have no idea what skilled means, but the Missale Romanum prior to 1970 has to possess a knowledge of the Latin language sufficient for a thorough comprehension of the rubrics and liturgical texts, and be animated by a lively pastoral charity and by a sense of ecclesial communion. The priest should have at heart not only the correct celebration of the liturgy, but also the pastoral and spiritual care of the faithful. So basically, I mean, your local bishop, if he really wants to, could just say, well, you don't meet this criteria, you don't meet that criteria, or whatever. So
I hate to be rude, but I'm sure those qualities would be being assessed by a panel that would possess none of those qualities.
Well, I mean, unfortunately, if you're in their, what do you want to call it? If you're in their camp, you play by their rules, right? So I think there was something similar that happened around the time of Summorum Pontificum. You had certain bishops trying to resist it by saying, oh, you got to do an exam, you got to do a test to make sure, and things like that. And I think there was some sort of Vatican declaration or a study, that report that was done that said that couldn't be done. But it's basically giving ammunition to the modernists, basically, to those who want to phase out the old rite. So that will definitely happen, where you have bishops that aren't interested or don't want the old rite. In places like, you've got there's a couple of American bishops who have got flourishing and have encouraged flourishing traditional communities in their diocese. Well, there's provisions within the motu proprio for that too, right? So they're still required to kind of oversee it. Whereas previously, these communities reported directly to Ecclesia Dei and then to whatever the subsequent congregation was that oversaw it. Now they're under the local bishop, but the local bishop also has to implement this. And so it would be interesting how they enforce it.
Going back to, I think, something we were talking about earlier in terms of our personal reactions to this, I felt somewhat bad because I can't say this issue overly animated me. And maybe it's because it's very difficult for us to appreciate the emotions that would be going through the heads of the smaller Latin Mass communities, given our Society of St. Pius X background. This doesn't necessarily affect us personally, but still, you would say, don't panic. But I think the most important thing that people can do wherever they are is look at what they can control.
Yeah.
And
be there for their priests as well.
Be there for the priests. But also, interestingly enough, we're talking about wider geopolitical issues. I think it's very important to have the ability to make a well-informed, autonomous judgment. And that's topical for a number of different things that are going on in the world today. Not saying which way that judgment goes, but you'd call it the Thomas More issue, as you referred to it before. Having the ability to remain calm, take all the factors into account, and then go, I'm not going to be swayed or pressured by what everybody else is doing. This is based on my analysis of all the information that's before me, based on the best comprehension I have of those things. This is what my heart is telling me to do, and to do that.
Yeah, basically the rules of the game have changed as of yesterday now. And so, you mentioned United Clans earlier, and as you say, you and I are too young to have had to make these kind of hard decisions. These were the decisions made by our parents or grandparents in terms of the SSPX faithful. But we've had to make those. Maybe we've had the luxury of, you and I have been brought up in that. But so it is quite an interesting moment to observe. But it's a case of analyzing the data, or analyzing the information, I should say, and then making an educated decision and about which way things are going to go. But it will come from the top down. So it will be sort of, once the head of whatever community says to his priests, right, this is it. Okay. But you need to be prepared for it, I would say, as well. So, if you've got a courageous priest who refuses to go along with this, then he's essentially going to be kicked out. I suspect, given history, given the precedent. So you've got to, if you've got strong traditional Latin Mass communities, the people need to rally around these priests and make it so that they're going to look after their priests if they decide to stay the course, as it were, and have their Thomas More moment.
That's it.
Yeah, I mean, pray for them as well.
Amen. And it is, we've already discussed it, but in closing, it's a great opportunity for the Society of St. Pius X and, well, it's priests. And what you would hope, that this is just me personally, what I would not want to see, and you may see it, just given the way things are people using this as an opportunity, or seeing it appropriate to stand up and start really using volatile language. And going, you see, this is, we told you so. I think it's a great opportunity for the clergy and the laity in the society to stand up and just put on display the fruits of traditional Catholicism, preach traditional Catholicism. I don't think you necessarily need to tell people how bad the world is. You need to point out the errors, but I think people need positivity, good news, traditional Catholicism, unadulterated, which is, at the end of the day, positive good news. And I think people need it, and more so now than ever.
Oh, for sure. And I think what's sort of helped in a weird way is the way we've all had to handle the restrictions, the tyrannical restrictions, I'm going to say, put on us but in the last year or so in our various countries. I don't think there's very few countries where the restrictions have not been, tyrannical, but also, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, but they've gone way further than that, in closing down churches. So what I wanted to say was that I think that has prepared us to be able to kind of, but deal with this situation from the perspective from where we are, charitably, and to be able to, and I don't think you will see volatile language or kind of criticisms or anything like that. It will just be a calm kind of continued business as usual from our perspective. Yeah. And not an easy time for a lot of people, I think, but we'll see where it goes.
Amen. But that's why we need rosé. That's why we need trips to.
I thought you were going to say rosary. That too.
Just a sign of how much I have to improve, and I'm going to need all the rosé in the world to help me improve. So,
yeah.
Chris, you're an absolute legend.
Oh, you too.
Really, really appreciate you joining me. Loved hearing about Provence. Loved hearing about your travels. Congratulations again. Great case analysis of what has happened in the past couple of days in wider church news, and really appreciate you joining me in the lounge room yet again. You're great to have.
Thanks a lot, Tom. All the best.